Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Every Movie Ever. This is the show where, again, we are trying to review every movie ever made. This is our 6th episode, and so far we aren't even close to reviewing every movie ever made. So I was trying to figure out ways that we could make that easier, and I thought, what if we do a whole show where we just review all of the James Bond movies? That seems like it ought to be a pretty good chunk. Now, I am a James Bond fan. I enjoy the Bond movies quite a bit. I started watching them in high school. Big shout out to my friend Joe Smith. Yes, that's his real name. For turning me on to the Bond movies. It was something that I have enjoyed ever since, up through the most recent one. And we're going to look back and we are going to talk about all of them, starting with the very first James Bond adventure, Dr. No, starring Sean Connery. This was, of course, Connery's first outing as Bond. Connery is great. The film is sort of less so. They haven't quite figured out what they want to do with James Bond yet. But, you know, that's the way of things, right? I'm only going to give this one 2.5 stars. Then Bond was back for the very first time with From Russia with Love. This is a huge improvement over Dr. No. This is the movie where the Bond formula comes into place in a plot about Bond trying to steal a decoding machine from the Russians. Here it is, the height of the Cold War. You've got Bond against the Russians. Also in play, Spectre, the evil criminal organization led by the mysterious Blofeld. In this movie, we've got Red Grant is Bond's nemesis. He's kind of an anti-Bond, an agent for Spectre who's just as smart and cunning and physical as Bond himself, played by Robert Shaw terrifically. Grant is one of the most underrated of the Bond villains, one of the greats. You also have this great plot where Bond has to seduce a Russian agent. She's supposed to be a double agent, but Bond turns her into a triple agent, where she's supposed to be working for Spectre, but pretending to work for Bond, but Bond makes it so she's actually working for Bond. And we can't forget the great Karen Bay. I want to say a local British operative who works in Turkey or wherever, I kind of forget, who befriends Bond. He's the first of these kind of older mentor Bond friend figures that we get out of the movies. A lot of those Bond formula things fall into place here in a movie that is an absolute perfect Bond movie. And I particularly have to point out that great train fight at the end where Bond fights Grant on the train in a real confined space. It's a great fight. You've also got the first appearance of Q in this movie, the first Q gadgets, in this case a very streamlined, cool briefcase with a bunch of hidden components to it. Great, great Bond movie, 5 stars all the way. The third Bond movie is probably the most iconic, Goldfinger. I think we all know the song, right? Goldfinger! That's all I can sing before I get sued. What a movie. This one is, yeah, it's the most iconic Bond movie, featuring Odd Job, the henchman who throws his hat and it breaks things. You've got Auric Goldfinger as your main bad guy, a guy who wants to melt all of the gold in Fort Knox to steal it. You have Honor Blackman as Pussy Galore, sort of your most iconic Bond woman, probably, right? This is a terrific Bond movie. It's maybe a little bit goofier than From Russia with Love, which is a little bit more realistic. But Goldfinger really, it takes everything that From Russia with Love set up and it cements it. It's the kind of Bond movie. It's so great. You've got to see this one. If you're only ever going to see one Bond movie in your life, it should probably be Goldfinger. 5 stars. Coming off of the heels of Goldfinger, you would think that things would be all right with the Bond world, but no, we run into the brick wall that is Thunderball. Thunderball is one of my 2 least favorite Bond movies. I go back and forth about which one I think is worse, and you'll find out what that other one is later in the show. Thunderball, it's all right, I guess, in some ways. It's, Bond doing his Bond thing. The problem with Thunderball for me is it features a lot of underwater fighting. Bond puts on scuba gear and does a lot of stuff underwater. I mean, like maybe a good 20 minutes of this movie take place just underwater. And I gotta tell you, it is boring as heck. This one does not do it for me at all. Even Connery's great charisma can't save it. This is the one Bond movie that if it's on TV, I'm probably not going to watch even a part of it. I'm only going to give this one 1.5 stars. And that's all for Connery. That whole 1.5 stars, that is just because Connery is Connery. Otherwise, I don't even know what I would give this movie. You Only Live Twice. This is sort of depending on how you look at it, this is the last Bond movie of the initial Sean Connery cycle of Bond movies, right? This is the one where he goes to Japan, right? Tiger Tanaka is his kind of sidekick guy in this one. Tiger Tanaka is a lot of fun. A lot of the stuff in Japan is a lot of fun. But ultimately, this is also the big volcano lair for Blofeld, and we get Donald Pleasance's Blofeld at the end. To be honest with you, the whole thing doesn't quite come together. There's some kind of icky race stuff in it that isn't great, particularly when Bond disguises himself as an Asian guy. Yeah, that's probably all we should say about that. Otherwise, it's a pretty so-so affair for Bond. After this, Connery did not want to do any more Bond movies, and you can feel it in his performance that he is kind of done. So I'm only giving this one 2.5 stars. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, then, is kind of the black sheep of the Bond movies. The problem with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, like I said, after You Only Live Twice, Connery was out. He didn't want to do any more of them. So they get this dude, George Lazenby, who was an Australian model, to be the new James Bond. And George Lazenby is what is wrong with this movie. Otherwise, this movie is phenomenal. Phenomenal. It could possibly be the best Bond movie if you had Connery in it. You've got Diana Rigg in it as Tracy, the Bond girl, the best Bond girl ever. She's so smart and brave and cool that Bond even marries her at the end of it. Plus, she comes from like a weird criminal family in Italy. She's super cool. Telly Savalas is Blofeld. You've got great ski chases. You've got this weird, crazy mind control plot that Blofeld's up to. Tracy's father is a new Karen Bay type, and he's terrific. The problem is that Lazenby is wooden and boring, and he drags the whole thing down with his lack of charisma. So, you have what could have been the best Bond movie ever, ruined by the worst Bond ever, so we gotta end up somewhere in the middle on this one, and that means 3 stars. Lazenby, despite being the worst, they asked him back to do another Bond movie, and guess what? He said no. Lazenby said no. So they paid Connery an unheard of $1 million, and he comes back for Diamonds Are Forever. Now, there was a time when I would have told you that Diamonds Are Forever was one of my favorite Bond movies. But upon most recent reviewing, not so much. It's pretty campy, it's pretty cheesy. Connery's not super engaged, the plot's not super engaged. You've got Mr. Kidd and Mr. Wint are the bad guys in this one. They're a pair of dudes. Who are coded but are pretty clearly homosexual, who are the killers in this one. But they've got a great relationship. They're a lot of fun to watch. They're terrific. Tiffany Case is the Bond girl in this one. She's not so great. Blofeld's not so great. The action's not so great. The Vegas sequence is pretty good. Kidd and Wint are the highlights of this. It's nice to see Connery again, but the most stars that I can possibly give this together into a 3. It's a 3. Live and Let Die, then, is Roger Moore's debut outing as James Bond, and he comes out of it like a shot. Live and Let Die, this is one of the best Moore pictures by my standards. This is the one where he goes to the South to fight Yaphet Kotto, who's a drug dealer in New Orleans. We get a lot of scenes with the cool New Orleans funerals. You've got the Uncola 7-Up guy as Baron Samedi, who's a pretty cool henchman. Teehee is the other henchman with his robotic hook arm. Bond has to run across crocodiles at one point. He's fighting some guys. This one's a way more streamed down. There aren't really any gadgets in it. It's just Bond being cool in the early 70s, getting things done. Yaphet Kotto also pretty great. And Jane Seymour is the Bond girl Solitaire in this one. She's terrific. You know, it's a pretty good movie. Again, These movies are not the most racially sensitive, and this is another one where it shows a little bit, but it's a really fun movie, a really solid outing for Moore. And plus, who can forget that theme song by Wings? 3.5 stars. Live and Let Die, we get The Man with the Golden Gun, which on paper, this ought to be one of your best Bond outings, right? Roger Moore has just proven that he can do it, and he can do it well as Bond, right? Live and Let Die was so good. And so for the villain for this one, they get the legendary Christopher Lee, who had played Dracula in all those great Hammer horror movies. Modern audiences probably know him better as Saruman in the Lord of the Rings movies and Count Dooku in the Star Wars prequels, right? Christopher Lee is one of your all-time great screen villains, and in this one, he's the assassin Scaramanga, the man who never misses, going up against Bond. And alongside Scaramanga, we have Hervé Villechaize from Fantasy Island, Tattoo. In this movie, he plays the unfortunately named Knick-Knack, and they're going to go up against Bond in a plot that has something to do with a machine that gets its power from the sun or something. I'm not so sure about that part. The movie itself, though, it just does not really work. There's some cool stuff in it, some cool stunts like there are in all the Bond movies. There's a great car flip in the middle of this one. Lee's got some charisma in it, Moore's got some charisma in it, but they're really hampered by a weak script, and I can only give this one 2 stars. The Spy Who Loved Me, this is another one of those ones that's a pretty iconic movie for a lot of people. This is the one that starts out with the great ski chase that ends with the Union Jack parachute and everything. Great stunts in this one, but it's not one that ever really did anything for me. It introduces Richard Kiel as Jaws as a villain, but the plot, which is about a bad guy who wants to submerge the earth under the oceans and stuff, it doesn't do it for me. This one's way too 70s. This is Disco Bond, and Disco Bond is not really what I'm looking for. It's got its moments, but I can't give it more than 2.5 stars. Moonraker is more of the same, even worse, with a lot of it in space. And James Bond, my friends, does not belong in space. Still, you would think this would be the absolute dog of the Bond series, and it's not that bad. It's bad, but it ain't that bad. It's watchable. It's not quite campy enough to be fun. It doesn't have as much camp as Diamonds Are Forever have, which kind of keeps it good and watchable. It's a stinker, but it's not a horrible stinker. 2 stars. Just when you think it's all over for Roger Moore, he's had 3 kind of stinkers in a row, here comes For Your Eyes Only. This is the peak of the Moore mountain, and it's one of the best Bond movies. This one, Moore's Bonds in those last couple of entries had gotten super silly. Here we're stripping it all away for a really solid espionage plot. What is that plot? To be honest with you, I don't really remember. It's hard to remember what his mission is in all of these ones, but this is such a great movie featuring Topol in the Karen Bay type role this time. It's just a great espionage thriller set largely in Greece. Moore is really on his game here. This is the one to see if you're a Roger Moore fan for my money. 4 big stars. Octopussy! Back in trouble. Roger Moore is getting a little long in the tooth for the role here. Probably should have gone out on a high with For Your Eyes Only. Octopussy involves a circus and Fabergé eggs. It's not great. It's just not great. Bond's in clown makeup at one point. I can't say a lot of good things about this one. This is another 2-star Bond affair. Then you've got Never Say Never Again. Never Say Never Again. So all of these movies we've talked about up to this point have been produced by Eon Productions and Cubby Broccoli. That's a guy, by the way. There's a guy named Cubby Broccoli. And his Bond, he created the Bond movies along with Harry Saltzman. They came up with the whole thing. Ian Fleming came up with the character, but they're the ones who made the movie series, and they made them so great. Well, the same year Octopussy comes out, a rival studio managed to lock down the disputed rights to the script from Thunderball. They had some guy write Thunderball, and he managed to do some legal wrangling that gave him the rights to the script from Thunderball and the ability to remake it as another movie called Never Say Never Again, produced by a different studio. They even lured Connery back, so this the same year you got Moore and Octopussy, you've got Connery in Never Say Never Again. And what can I say about it? I can say it's better than Thunderball, but that's about it. It's not great. You got Kim Basinger as the Bond girl. Max von Sydow as Blofeld. You'd think that'd be a slam dunk. It ain't. There's a weird third act business involving, I believe, Al-Qaeda as heroes because it was the 80s. It's a rough one, but again, better than Thunderball. 2 stars. A View to a Kill! Roger Moore's last Bond film. Man, does he look old in this one. This is another classic Bond missed opportunity because you've got Christopher Walken as your bad guy, but they can't quite sell it in a confusing plot involving a pretty old James Bond who can't quite do the action anymore, weird snowboarding sequences, a weird butterfly dance, Grace Jones as the evil henchman, and it's something about microchips. It's not a good one, folks. Even though it features the theme song by Duran Duran that was at the time, and up until I think just a couple years ago, I'm not sure if another one's done this, I gotta check the internet, but for a long time was the only Bond theme to make it to #1 on the charts. It's a stinkburger. 1.5 stars. Enter Timothy Dalton. I think Timothy Dalton gets a raw deal. I think that what he's doing in his Bond movies, which are more grounded and violent and closer to the Ian Fleming novels in the characterization of Bond, where he's not necessarily a hero all the time. You know, it's a lot like what the Daniel Craig movies have become, but in the 80s it wasn't what people wanted, and Dalton had a rough go of it because of it. It also doesn't help that Living Daylights is honestly not a great movie. It's pretty forgettable. You know, it involves Russia and cellos. It's nothing to write home about. But it's a 2.5 star. But what I do like, and a lot of people don't like this one, so don't rake me over the coals here, is License to Kill. This is Dalton's second outing. It is super violent. The plot involves a South American drug dealer, and Bond is out for revenge. His longtime pal, CIA agent Felix Leiter, who I have not mentioned before, but he's a background character in a lot of these movies, he's trying to investigate this drug dealer dude, and the drug dealer dude has sharks bite his legs off, so Bond goes off the reservation to get revenge, a plot point that I think they've stolen from most of the Daniel Craig movies. It's violent, it's glorious, you've got a young Benicio del Toro in there. I like this one a lot, 3.5 stars. So, like I said, the Dalton couldn't last. The 80s didn't want him, and they shut down Bond movies for a number of years after License to Kill, only to come back with Pierce Brosnan, the guy they had wanted to star in Living Daylights, but he couldn't do it because of Remington Steele, right? But now they've got him, and they've got him in GoldenEye. GoldenEye is another solid debut film for a Bond. If you're like me, you played hours and hours of GoldenEye on the N64. The movie's pretty exciting. 007's up against, I think 006, maybe 008. I don't know. But you've got Sean Bean as a rogue MI6 agent, and Russian missiles, and Famke Janssen as Xenia Onatopp, the lady what kills people with her legs. Alan Cumming is the evil computer programmer who clicks his pen a lot. It's a fun movie. It's 90s as heck, but it's a lot of fun. 3.5 stars. Tomorrow Never Dies, also pretty fun, not as fun. Where this one kind of misses a little bit for me is in the villain played by Jonathan Pryce, who Jonathan Pryce is great, but they've got him playing this like Rupert Murdoch, media mogul type villain, and that, I don't know, Bond against a media mogul, something about it doesn't quite ring true to me. But you get Terry Hatcher in this one, although she's gone pretty quick, spoilers. And you got Michelle Yeoh as a Chinese agent helping Bond. The stuff with Michelle Yeoh is great, particularly the motorcycle chase where they're handcuffed together and each one has a hand on the steering thing to steer the motorcycle. It's a pretty fun movie, 3 big stars. The World Is Not Enough. This is a difficult one for me to review, folks. This was the first Bond movie I saw in the theaters after becoming a Bond fan. I think I'd seen GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies in the theater. But by the time World Is Not Enough had come out, I was ready for some Bond. I loved it. And there's a lot to like about The World Is Not Enough, particularly that opening boat chase through the canals and stuff. That is a lot of fun. But there's also a lot to not like, namely Denise Richards as a nuclear scientist. And while the villains are pretty good, they kind of don't make a lot of sense. You got the guy who's got a bullet in his brain so he can't feel pain. And then you've got the lady who you think she's the Bond girl, but it turns out she's a criminal mastermind. It never works quite as well as it should. A lot of people don't like this one, and they're right. But I've got so much nostalgia tied into this one, I can't help but like it an awful lot. So I am going to give it 3 stars. Even though I shouldn't, I'm giving it 3 stars. This one is even dumber and sillier than The World Is Not Enough. This is the one with the Madonna theme song and the Madonna cameo. Also, an invisible car that drives on ice. It's also Halle Berry. Halle Berry is probably the thing that most people remember from this. She's Jinx. She's an American agent that helps Bond. At one point, they were even talking about spinning her off into her own movies. But listen, folks, let's be honest. This is not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. The campiness of it makes it kind of okay to watch, but not great. I'm going to have to give this one 2 stars. Then the Bond franchise comes thundering back in one of its best installments. Daniel Craig's first movie, kind of a flashback movie. Bond gets his 00 status in a cool black and white sequence early on. There's cool poker playing. There's Mads Mikkelsen as a cool villain, What Bleeds Blood. You've got a really cool Felix Leiter in, I can't remember his name right now, but the dude from Westworld. This is a pretty good movie. A lot of good character stuff from Bond. A lot of cool action. A lot of cool set pieces. Great reinvention for the franchise. 4.5 stars. And they dropped the ball. They dropped the ball big. We come off of Casino Royale with a Quantum of Solace. Now the big problem here, this is my second least favorite Bond movie. This is the one that ties with Thunderball as like the worst. The problem with this one, the writer's strike. The big Hollywood writer's strike meant they never got a good script together before they started filming, and man, does it show. Bond is out for revenge because his girlfriend got killed in the last movie, and then it's hard to remember anything about this one. There's a dead lady in a barrel of oil at one point. I don't know. This one sucks. 1.5 stars. Now, the Craig Bond movies, they kind of do this. They're real up and down, because then after Quantum of Solace, we get Skyfall, which is a movie that people love. I don't love it so much. It's all right. I think it's a pretty good movie. I think the third act, where they have to home alone Bond's childhood house to save them from Javier Bardem, I think that's pretty silly. I think it's a little long in the tooth, but I like Ralph Fiennes in it, and I like a lot of it. The theme song's good. The opening sequence is tremendous. This is a real solid Bond outing that I just think it's a little silly at the end. 3 stars. That brings us at last to Spectre, the, at the moment, last Bond movie. This is the one where they said, we're going to build off of all of the Daniel Craig Bond movies, and we're going to reintroduce Blofeld, as played by Christoph Waltz. We all love Christoph Waltz in those Quentin Tarantino movies, right? Well, what you forgot, Eon Productions, was that he's not any good in not Quentin Tarantino movies, you dummies. Spectre is not a great movie. It's just not. It's all right. It's got its moments, I guess, but it gets pretty silly. Dave Bautista plays the thug guy, and I don't know, he's got like metal fingernails or something. That's dumb. Blofeld is wasted. There's a weird plot where I guess he's Bond's. Well, they keep acting like he's Bond's like half-brother or something, but I guess he's like the kid of the people who took Bond in after his parents were killed or something, and also it doesn't matter. I don't know, man. This one just does not work. Cool opening sequence, cool Day of the Dead opening sequence, and I like the female lead in it a lot, but it's a Bond, the action scenes read like Bond's greatest hits, but then it doesn't work at all, kind of. This is another between a 2 and a 2.5 for me. Gavin, what am I giving it?
2.
Yeah, let's say 2. 2 stars. It's a shame to go out on 2 stars at the end of our Bond special, but that's what they've given us. Hopefully the next Bond movie will be better. Right now there's rumblings. There are rumblings that maybe Christopher Nolan's involved. I think that's a bad idea if true. They're trying desperately to get Craig to return for another one. I'm torn on it. I would love to see Craig go out on a high note, but I also don't want another stinker. It might be time to reinvent the franchise once again. Exciting names have been bandied about, like Tom Hiddleston and Idris Elba, but let's be honest, neither one of them are going to get to be Bond. That's just not ever how it works. It's never who you think it's going to be. I'm looking forward to whatever Bond 25 is, though, and I'll tell you all about it on this show when we get there, because they're still making movies, so I'll still be trying to review every movie ever.